I think a cult has taken over downtown Clearwater, Florida. These people are everywhere watching your every move. It's absolutely horrifying when you see it for what it really is. If anyone has any more information on this, let me know. But here's my story of the cult of Clearwater. But I'll be quick. If you're ready to suspend your disbelief and become fully immersed in today's adventure, you found your new favorite channel. We post once a week, but there's plenty on the channel to binge. So if you're ready, like the video for good luck, because you're gonna need it. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Enjoy the show. So a few years ago, my friend Ebro and I decided to go on a little boys trip to Clearwater, Florida. We stayed on Clearwater Beach, which isn't actually downtown Clearwater. It's a little island off the coast of Clearwater, but the place is absolutely stunning. It was very fun the first couple days, but by the third day, we decided to go get dinner in downtown Clearwater. We thought the easiest thing to do would be to take an Uber into the city, and all we did was look up a really nice restaurant on Yelp. The place looked lively and great with a good ambiance and quality food, but once we pulled up in the Uber, the place was completely closed down. We didn't want to pay any more for the Uber to take us somewhere else. It was a nice day out, and these windows were just boarded up of this initial restaurant, so we were like, whatever, let's just walk to our next location. There's a bunch of restaurants nearby. And mind you, we were on vacation mode. We were just having a good time. Taking a short walk to another restaurant doesn't mess up your energy. It doesn't mess up the vibe of the vacation. The first block into our walk, we didn't really think anything of it. We just thought we were on a quiet block in a very nice, well-kept city. But as we kept walking through this downtown area, the weirder the place got. This place was an absolute ghost town, and I really mean it. There was nobody on the street. It was bizarre. If I'm being honest with you, this place seemed borderline abandoned. It wasn't abandoned like I Am Legend, post-apocalyptic abandoned. It was actually super clean and tidy. It was more like Thanos snapped his fingers, and we hadn't realized that everybody had turned to ash. We were chatting for the first couple minutes of the walk, but once we started really taking in our surroundings, we had to acknowledge to one another that what we were witnessing here was a little bit weird, and we were a little bit on edge, because it got to the extent that the only other sound that we heard around us was the echoing of our voices. But our only option in that scenario is to just keep it moving. We know what restaurant we're going to. We're not going to call another Uber. It's not like there's violence going on. We might as well just keep walking. It didn't feel dangerous. It just felt weird. But the first sign of life that we saw was while we were passing this very large off-white beige building. There was a security guard out front of this building on his post. So we figured that this area is probably just filled with very secure buildings, and it just doesn't get a lot of foot traffic. But that was until we got closer to the security guard. We expected him to give us like a kind nod, or maybe just stand there firmly trying to intimidate us if he thought we were a threat. But this guy looked at us, got very awkward and nervous, and then scurried inside and locked the door behind him. And to be honest, in the moment, we laughed at that. We like hit each other on the arm and we're like pointing at him like, why is this guy acting like we're threatening and coming to break into this building? And why would a security guard be so scared of just two random dudes who are clearly on vacation? That was the first very odd occurrence, but what are we supposed to do? Like knock on the door and be like, hey, it's okay. He's just some random dude and we're going to get dinner. But even though that first interaction was kind of funny, kind of weird, the second thing that happened actually started to make us a little bit nervous, because the second block that we went down, we started to notice that all of the buildings in the area were this same off-white color. And since there was nobody else around and we're just standing on this empty street with zero foot traffic with these off-white buildings towering over us on each side, it started to give a backrooms feeling, because everything seemed so uniform and similar that in the back of your head you almost think that it's never going to end. And after we realized that all of these buildings are virtually identical, clearly built by the same contractor or same organization, we started to look a little bit closer at them, and we noticed that you couldn't see into any of the windows. They all either had blackout shades or were tinted with the reflective tint, so there was no way of seeing in unless you went all the way up to it and cupped your hands to look through. And on top of that weird uniformity of the buildings and the tints, you couldn't see into them, obviously, which meant that you couldn't see if there was anybody inside working. Because initially you think, oh, everybody's probably just in the middle of their workday, and that's why nobody's on the street. But when you look into the buildings and you can't see anybody in offices, you're like, is this place a ghost town? Is it completely abandoned? Is this a nuclear wasteland? Are we not supposed to be here? And as these thoughts are going through my head, I see a glimpse of a little bit of movement about a half a block down. I saw a black gate door swing open on this empty block, and some dude wearing all black just sprinted out of this gate. Not walking, not running. This man was absolutely sprinting, and he was just going straight across the street. We both faintly saw him in the distance, and we both started pointing pointing to make sure that the other one saw. But he was pretty far away, so it's not like we could make out any facial features or what his intentions really were. He was just kind of like a black dot sprinting across the street. But we realized pretty quickly what he was actually doing. Once he was across the street, he opened another black gate on the other side and then stood post like he was a security guard guarding the area in between the first gate and the second gate. He just stood there like he was a soldier waiting orders. And then once the gate on the other side was propped open and he was ready in his post, something on the other side, the original side that he ran out of, happened. And this is going to sound mundane at first, but I promise you it was very weird if you stick around for the details. A group of what must have been 40 full-grown adults walked from the first gate across the street and through the second gate. And within 30 seconds, this massive group of people were all completely out of sight behind the second gate. And I know that sounds dull. I know that doesn't sound that freaky, but there were 40 of them. And not only that, every single person in that group was wearing the same uniform. And on top of all of that, their body language was that of people that are in custody. I don't know if you've ever seen those maximum security prison documentaries, but there's these specific maximum security prisons that move their inmates around in very specific ways, where they put their hands behind their back in handcuffs and have them lean over so they're staring at the floor, and they keep them in 2 rows and just move them from room to room. They're never allowed to look around the prison. They're never allowed to know where they really are. They just have to stare at the floor and basically like speed walk to their location. And that's kind of how these people moved. It's not like they were handcuffed. They just had suits and ties and backpacks. They clearly weren't inmates, but the way they were moving was as if they were being herded from place to place. And like I said, they weren't handcuffed and they also weren't completely bent over staring at the floor, but their posture was very poor. It looked as if they had zero self-confidence, like today was the worst day of their life and they've been staring at their phone for 32 hours straight. Their necks were just cranked, looking down, hunched over, just holding on to both sides of their backpacks and hustling across the street as if they wanted nobody to see them. And they were moving with an intensity that felt as if they missed a step or they tripped or got out of line. They felt like they were going to be punished. Their body language was just that of like an inmate. But this group was gone as quickly as they came, and the street just went back to being completely silent. And actually, let me correct that. The street was never not silent. They were completely quiet. They didn't make a peep. It was 40 grown adults, and they didn't make a sound as they were being herded from one side of the block to the other. If you didn't see them, you wouldn't know that they were there. The only sound we heard of that entire interaction was the gate popping open, the sound of the first dude sprinting, just hearing his shoes hit the concrete, and the second gate closing. We weren't even sure if we wanted to walk past where it happened. It was that weird. So we decided to take a detour around that block. Even if it took a couple extra minutes to get to the restaurant, we didn't really want to walk past what just happened. It was worth it to walk around. But the other block was not doing us any favors either. At first we thought this second block is definitely better than the last one because we don't see any signs of weirdness. But then we noticed that there were odd vehicles sporadically parked down the street. There were about 7 completely white, unmarked buses parked directly in front black gates, very similar to the black gates that they had just herded 40 people from one side to the other. And these massive buses were parked in places that seemed as if they were waiting for a herd of people to be shuttled into them. But on top of the position in which these buses were parked, the windows were also completely blacked out. You couldn't see into them, which is kind of typical for transportation vehicles like coach buses and things like that. But what freaked us out was that it was the same reflective tint as the buildings around it. This got me and Ebro talking, and we were starting to brainstorm, like, what could this area be? Is this some type of penitentiary or some type of mandatory rehab center? It was the only thing that would make sense to us. We were just spitballing ideas at each other, and that seemed to be the obvious conclusion, that these people weren't here voluntarily. And we were still trying to keep our cool about the situation. We weren't panicking. We weren't trying to freak out. We were just trying to go get dinner on vacation. We were trying to be upbeat about the situation, so we were kind of joking about it. Like, yes, this was a little bit weird, and we were getting a little bit nervous. But usually when you're in situations like that with a good friend, on vacation in particular, you start kind of joking about it, trying to ease the tension in the air, because after a few blocks, we're not even going to notice this. It'll be a funny story to tell, but it isn't that serious, and bringing a sense of humor into the situation makes you feel better about it. So I was trying to make Ebro laugh, so we were cracking a couple jokes and we were laughing about it, but I decided very stupidly to take the jokes to the next level. We were joking about about the tints and how we just want to see what they're doing on the inside. So I decided to hop onto the bumper of one of these buses and look in through the back window. And it's not like the alarm went off on the bus, or I got a ticket, or I got scolded by somebody, or I caused any damage to the vehicle. It was so much worse than that. I hopped onto the bumper and I made the suspension bounce a little bit, and I put my hands by my eyes so I could look through the tint. And the second my eyes and my hands touched that glass, I could see that this bus was completely full. Every single seat in that bus was completely full of adults wearing matching uniforms, looking just like that group of people we saw cross the street earlier. And I'm hopping on the back of this bus. I immediately get embarrassed because I think they're gonna look at me like I'm an idiot, like I'm vandalizing something. But as I'm looking at these grown adults' faces, they are not looking at me like I'm a nuisance. They are looking at me like they are scared of me, genuinely scared of me. And I understand that I'm hopping on their vehicle, but I had a big smile on my face, clearly on vacation. I'm not walking around hurting anybody, but these people are in this bus with their heads whipped around, hiding behind the seats as if I'm going to attack them or something. They didn't look like I startled them from hopping on the vehicle. They looked like worst nightmare come true scared. It was as if they were all watching us from the bus, and me hopping on the back bumper was a worst case scenario. And like I said, they were trying to hide from me, tucked behind the seats, full grown adults, locked in a bus, hiding from two dudes dressed like tourists going to dinner on vacation. It didn't make any sense. The way I sprung off that vehicle and I hopped off that bumper, and I looked at Ebro like, yo, we gotta go. And we're doing that half walk, half run thing for the rest of the block, and I'm withholding the information that I just found out because I don't want to stop and tell them until we're out of their sight. I just want to turn the corner and get out of there as fast as possible. So as we're about to start whipping around this corner and I'm about to start speaking, letting Ebro know what I just witnessed, I collide with somebody that was sprinting at top speed. Hey guys, just taking a quick break from this story. I wanted to let you guys know that we're dropping another merchandise drop because the last one went so well. This time it is the Joshua Tree merch. Take a look. I think it's pretty sweet. If you can't afford the merchandise, don't even worry about it. Just watch the video. Just like the video. It's all good. We just want to give free content to you guys. Some people ask us to make merchandise, so we're making it for them. We only make about 75 of these, so if you really want them, grab one. We want to spend our time making free videos for you, not packaging merch all the time. But we think this design is really cool, and we think you guys will like it, and hopefully it sells out just like last time. Back to the show. My initial reaction is that I'm being attacked, like I'm getting blindsided as I'm turning the corner. So my instinct is to grab some grips so I could start this fight from an advantageous position. Right after the collision, just out of pure reaction, I grabbed a collar tie and some wrist control just so I could control their posture and one of their appendages and maybe have a frame to stop them from hitting me. But once it set in that the initial impact with this person wasn't very devastating, and once I got a good feel of them on their wrist and their neck, I could feel that they were kind of feeble. I just abandoned my grips and pushed off so I could get a good look at their entire person. And I'm just looking at some scared kid that couldn't be over 18 years old. And when I was grabbing him and pushed off, he felt like he couldn't have weighed 120 pounds soaking wet. Not to mention, he was wearing all black, just like the other guy that we saw sprinting across the street at the beginning. I couldn't tell if it was the same guy that we saw sprinting earlier, but this kid was sprinting with such intensity that he collided into us and couldn't stop. Ebro was as confused as I was because I tied up with this kid like I was about to start throwing knees to the body, but I broke the tension of the situation by asking this 18-year-old kid if he was okay. And I did a playful laugh a little bit to try to break the tension to make him feel a little bit more comfortable around me. And I made a little joke telling him he scared me for a second. I was about to start swinging, trying to make him laugh. But this kid looked at me with a 1,000-yard stare, like he was looking right through me. And when I tell you, this kid looked dead behind his eyes, I actually don't even know how else to explain it. It was as if he was emotionless and just a shell of a person. And he was covered in sweat as if he had been running for hours. And like I mentioned, he didn't feel like he was 120 pounds soaking wet. He was actually probably 120 pounds and soaking wet with sweat. It was gross. When I grabbed his wrist, it felt like his sleeve was waterlogged. And he didn't entertain my joke one bit. He just ignored us, turned around, and started sprinting in whatever direction he was sprinting previously. And Ebro started laughing because now he's trying to break the tension of the situation. And he says, bro, you were about to tee off on a teenager. But I didn't laugh because I hadn't told Ebro about what I saw in the bus yet. So I replied, if I teed off on that kid, me and you would have been fighting that entire bus back there. Bro, that thing was full of people. And Ebro's smile left his face faster than Ricky Bobby drives a car. And I followed up by letting him know they're just just sitting in there. And I continue explaining by saying, bro, they were just watching us. I swear there's something off here. And then Ebro says something that I didn't even think about. This man goes, there's 7 buses on this block. What are the odds that you looked into the only full one? This was a horrifying realization because we're looking back down this block filled with buses, and I know that the one that I looked into was filled with people. And if all of these buses are filled with people, that means that there's hundreds of people, scared adults, sitting in these buses completely silent watching us. But we're trying to grasp this situation, and I realize the kid in black is completely gone, and the people in the buses were clearly not coming out while we were still there. So all we could do was just keep moving, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get away from these buses. And I want to remind you that I'm telling you this from hindsight, where the situation is fully settled in and I realize how weird it is now. In the moment, I kind of knew how weird it was, but when weird situations are unfolding in front of you, you expect everything that happens to be the last thing that happens that day. Like, there's no way another completely bizarre thing is going to happen today. So when you walk away from a situation, you start to calm down because you're like, whew, at least I got out of that one. You don't expect another worse thing right around the corner. Like, at the time, we thought, okay, we're a couple minutes away from this restaurant. We're going to tell the waiter what just happened, and he's going to have a funny local explanation for us. And that's the only reason we didn't take off running in that situation. In hindsight, we should have. The bus thing definitely freaked me out, but it was more of a jump scare when you peek into something you're not expecting somebody to be looking back at you. I was more embarrassed than anything. So even though we did speed up our walking a little bit, it's not like we were fleeing the area in a panic. We just kept walking down the same street we were initially headed down, and we were only about 3 minutes away from the restaurant that we were going to. And then we saw another person right down the block standing in front of a storefront. And I initially thought that this is probably just another security guard that's going to flee into the building once we get close, just act all jittery and weird and peek at us and lock the door behind him. But once we got a little bit closer, I realized that this person was actually a woman, and she was wearing the uniform that all of the other people were wearing. And as we started closing in on her, I realized that she was just leaning up against the wall that she was posted on, similar to how the security guards were doing it, but she was holding some cards in her hand, and she was looking directly across the street, mumbling stuff to herself. She was completely zoned out, just talking to herself. To me, it looked like she was practicing an argument in her head, or she was reliving an argument that she had, saying all the things that she wished she said. We've all been there, reliving the arguments with good one-liners that we wish we used in the moment. And surprisingly, as we closed in on her, she didn't flee into the building. She just stayed there on her post, but we decided to move all the way to the left of the sidewalk to give her as much space as we possibly could, because she's just a woman alone on the street, and we're 2 grown men. We don't want to be rude. We don't want to make her feel uncomfortable. We want to give her as much space as we possibly can. But once she was aware of our presence, she just started approaching us with zero shame. No hesitation. She saw us from the corner of her eye. She got the little cards in her hands ready, and she shuffled over to us and just stood right in front of us, basically forcing us to stop walking. And before I knew it, I'm getting a pamphlet forced into my hand. This girl was being very pushy with her actions. Like, where she walked up to us, the position she decided to stand was completely obstructing our walkway. And she was forcing things into our hands and just speaking to us, not even asking us if we're having a good day, just talking directly at us. But her facial expressions didn't match her actions, and neither did her voice. Her face and voice were so void of emotion and humanity, and her eyes had this gloss over them, similar to that 18-year-old that ran into me. Like, if one of her friends came up to us and told us that she was sleepwalking right now, I would have believed them. And her tone was even more odd than the expression on her face. It was as if she had some obscure sales pitch memorized and was taught to say the things with certain inflections and specific emphasis on certain words. But since she was sleepwalking, or seemed to be sleepwalking, everything came out in a muffled tone. After she planted herself right in front of us, she just goes, "You two look like passionate young men, but there's always room for improvement. If you follow me, I'll provide a free personality test to start your journey into reaching your potential." That sentence that I just said can't be said blandly. Talking about self-help and reaching your potential, coming from somebody that was giving off her energy, were 2 incredibly conflicting messages. Because whatever self-help she's practicing, I don't want it. Like she should have delivered that line like this. You two look like passionate young men, but there's always room for improvement. If you follow me, I'll provide you with a free personality test that will lead us to unlocking your potential. But this girl is just completely deadpan, and before I'm able to completely turn down her offer, I see something about her that concerns me, and it actually got me interested in asking her more questions. This might sound a little bit odd, but I noticed that her hands were incredibly dirty, and I don't mean that in a vain way. They weren't food dirty. It's not like she had ketchup on her hands and I was just being nitpicky, like, oh, look at this dirty lady. Her hands were construction worker dirty. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but where you could see a film of dirt being built up in the ridges of her fingerprints, almost as if the depths of her hands are black, and there's just a dirty brown ring in the crevice of every nail. She looked like she'd been rubbing charcoal together like this all day, and on top of just having soot all over her hands, it seemed as if she had smears of plaster or paint all over them. So this girl must have been doing some form of hard labor sometime within the past 24 hours. And this stuck out to me because this lady was a small lady. She was very dainty. You don't often see somebody that looks like her with the hands of a contractor. It just didn't match. And on top of that, she was currently doing some type of customer service soliciting, which is a salesy position where usually you're supposed to be upbeat and well kept with a smile on your face and your hygiene good so you could actually sell something to somebody. So nothing about her appearance and this interaction made any sense. I could only assume in that situation, by the energy that she's giving off and her appearance, that this is some type of cry for help. And Ebro came to the same conclusion that I did, because his next question was, who exactly do you work for? And her reply was so dodgy. She didn't say, I work for blank. This lady said, at the org, we help people clear their minds and improve their lives. Would you like to follow me and take a free personality test? At this point, I thought that this lady might be a robot and she only had automated voice responses. And I was just about ready to walk away until her humanity came pouring out right in front of me. But it didn't come pouring out how you would expect it to. I start pointing my arm into the direction of the restaurant that we were heading to, ready to let her know that we have reservations and we're going to leave and we're going in that direction. And this girl flinched when I picked my hand up. She flinched like I was gonna hit her. I didn't lift my hand aggressively. I gently pointed very slowly, and she flinched like she was used to getting hit. But the craziest part about it is that she didn't act awkwardly after the flinch. There wasn't a moment of laughter after it happened, not like, oh, I wasn't gonna hit you, like that's funny, like I'm sorry I scared you, and then everybody laughs together to ease the tension. She flinched hard and then acted like she didn't and went immediately back to her robotic one-liners. She didn't acknowledge that she flinched so thoroughly that, as bad as this sounds, I think if I did hit her, she wouldn't have acknowledged that I hit her. I think she would have taken it and kept talking like it didn't happen. She looked as if she was trained to take physical punishments like this. And in that moment, we knew that this was a woman in need. And what are we supposed to do? Walk away? No, we had to do something. So I asked her something that would allow her to give us a sign that she needed help, but not a clear "are you okay?" because I didn't want her to start feeling paranoid. I made it seem like I was playing ball with her, like maybe I'm interested in your personality test, just in case she is paranoid about this situation and we might scare her off and she just goes back to her abuser. So I asked, if I take the personality test, can I work with you? And she said very robotically again, if you trust us, will help you accomplish anything you want in this life. Which is a massive promise, very optimistic. I like the positivity. But coming from her and her monotone voice, this sounded dreadful. You're supposed to say that type of sentence with your chest, otherwise it sounds completely depressing. And Ebro chimed in, clearly on the same page as me, trying to get a little bit more information without freaking her out. He goes, I'll only work with her if the wage is competitive. What are they paying you? And I assumed that he asked this question to gauge why she was even out here in the first place. There must be some type of monetary reward for this. And this girl replied something devastating. She said, at the org, we're provided a very generous $57 a week. Food and housing are provided, so all of that extra money is for me to save. This was a massive red flag. This was a grown woman. And anybody watching this knows that $57 in this economy, that's not enough to get by. I'm pretty sure eggs, a gallon of milk, and butter come out to $78.54. Somehow $5 footlongs are now $16.50, and the dollar menu at McDonald's is now the $5 meal deal. What I'm trying to punch home is that this girl could not get by on $57 a week, even if they're covering her housing and food. Plus, she looked so overworked. So that realization prompted my next question, which was, what are your typical work days like? Which she robotically replied, days start at 7 a.m. and end at 11 p.m. But that's if you fulfill all your duties. We sure work hard, but it sure is incredibly rewarding. I decided in that moment, after that response, I had to take a different angle in this conversation. I had to really make it seem like I was interested to get more information. So I said to her, I really like strict routine. Do they allow you to work every day and get overtime? And this poor girl replies without skipping a beat, we all work every day. It's the only way we're gonna accomplish our goals. We don't need extra compensation to work overtime. And mind you, this entire conversation, this girl is not looking us in the eyes. Her gaze is so far drifted off into the distance that she could be having this conversation with herself. And her last answer was enough for Ebro to take this conversation to a very serious place. He tried to get her to look at him. He stepped over to the side and got in front of her to get a better look at her face. And then he said, you look like you need a good meal. Why don't you come eat at the restaurant with us and we could help you? Do you have any family we can call? And this girl still hadn't made any eye contact or changed her expression. She blankly said, a blatant lie. They feed us more than we can ever eat. And my husband or children are exactly where they should be. The kids are studying at the ranch and my husband is at RPF getting realigned. So this was a big step for us because now we know that she has children and a husband. So our main priority in that situation is to get in contact with this guy because his wife is clearly not okay. She clearly needs some help, probably a meal and probably a good night's sleep. And I don't know why this is stupid, but I figured RPF was probably a chiropractor because she said getting realigned. I still don't know what RPF actually was, but it definitely wasn't a chiropractor. We both decided in that moment it was probably time to ask this girl if she actually needed help. So I said very clearly, ma'am, if you're being held here against your will, we will help you. You can leave with us right now and we will get you home to your family. And this was the first time in this whole interaction that she actually reacted to what we said. She looked as if the words that came out of my mouth set her off balance, as if she got a wave of vertigo and was stumbling back, losing her footing. She was shaking her head and stumbling as she was saying, I'm here because I'm committed. I'm committed to helping others. And she just kept repeating that, but at least now she was finally looking at us. But the way that she was saying it wasn't monotone like before. She was saying it as if she was guessing a correct answer, like she was being tortured and trying to guess the answer. And she kept repeating that, finally looking at us. She was saying it like she was being tortured and she was trying to guess the answer that the torturer was looking for to get him to stop. It was not like she was trying to tell the truth to get the torturer to stop, but it was as if she was trying to say whatever it took to get him to stop, true or not. And she was just shaking her head and still backing up, so I made it a point to look closely at her name tag so at least I had a name to tell the police. That's if she decides that she's not coming with us, at least I know her name. So I squint my eyes and I see a C, L, and I realize her name is Claire. So I put my hands up to her, signaling that I'm not gonna hurt her, and I just go, Claire, it's okay, Claire, it's fine, it's okay. I heard somewhere, probably like on YouTube or Reddit, that saying somebody's name to them in an intense situation calms them down. And it kind of worked a little bit because she stopped backing up for a second, so at least we could take another shot at one more question. And I let Ebro take the lead on this one because I didn't really know what to say in that moment. And he went way harder than I thought he was going to. He basically threw a curveball at this girl. This man goes, you do not need to say a word. If you are being trafficked, blink twice and we'll get help. This completely set her off and she started shaking her head again and she looked absolutely panicked at this point. But she said something odd. She said, you're acting like a suppressive person and I don't want to engage in that negativity. If you're still interested in the personality test, please come back after you eat. And by the time she finished that very awkward, panicked sentence, she had already locked herself in one of these off-white beige buildings and she was gone. And in retrospect, it looked like there were three major things going on inside of her in that last interaction. One, she looked super scared based on her body language. Two, she looked in denial based on what she said. And three, she looked desperate for help internally based on the fact that she blinked twice very clearly. It almost looked like her denial was fighting off the blinking, as if there was a war going on internally. And there were two separate people with completely different outlooks on life taking turns steering her. Ebro instinctually ran up to the door to look through the tints to see if there were any immediate danger inside. And right after, he whipped his head back at me and said, "She's talking to a couple dudes in there. I don't like this." And I couldn't agree more. Just standing here waiting was not the move. So we just took note of the street signs so we knew the crossroads, and we booked it to the restaurant we were going to. The initial vague plan was to get to this restaurant around other witnesses where we can then call the police, have them show up there, and let them know what just happened. And it only took us about 2 minutes to get up to this restaurant because we were sprinting. We were already close in general. But when we turned the corner to this restaurant, I couldn't believe what we ran into. This place was supposed to be a 4.5-star rated place. It's supposed to be bustling with people getting an early dinner just like us, but it was absolutely desolate, empty, zilch, zero, not a person, not a single hungry customer in this entire establishment. But at least it was opened and we could see a worker behind the bar. So we took a couple deep breaths, hitting each other on the chest, trying to pull ourselves together because we didn't want to freak out the bartender too bad, especially because no one else is there with us and two dudes running in with like panic in their face. It's gonna freak this dude out. He's gonna think we're robbing the place. So we walk up and approach him calmly, like we didn't just witness what we witnessed, and we just try to bring up the topic delicately. And the bartender was super friendly. He welcomed us. He's clearly a customer service guy. He asked us if we're just having drinks or we're gonna eat too. And we said, well, yeah, we're definitely looking to eat, so we need some menus. But we immediately turned the conversation by saying, hey, we don't want to freak you out or bring any trouble to your place, but we ran into somebody that we think needed some help a couple blocks back. And we were thinking we're probably going to call the police to meet us here so we could report it. I don't want to freak you out again, but it seemed serious. And the bartender seemed super understanding and not extremely fazed by what we were saying. In fact, he was giving an understanding nod with like a slight smirk on his face. It was as if he was trying to convey to us that he was used to hearing things like this. And the reply that he came back with kind of surprised me. He goes, you guys could call whoever you like, but I promise you, whoever that was that you ran into was there because they wanted to be. Let me take a wild guess. You bumped into him down the road by all those big beige buildings with all those white buses. And we both nodded our heads because we're like, okay, definitely some local knowledge here. He was spot on with the location of the interaction. And he followed up by saying, I wouldn't even bother, guys. The cops aren't going to help. This is a very common thing around here. They've gotten so many calls just like that, and every time they come and check it out, the person that somebody called for refuses to talk to them. So they have no choice but to leave. The cops are very sick of it at this point, if I'm being honest with you, so you boys are probably better off just letting it go. He was giving us some comfort about the situation because he's a local and it seems like he has interacted with this quite a bit, but we wanted to pry a little bit more and get a little bit of information. So I asked, what exactly is going on over there, because it seems a bit odd to me. And he replied, brushing it off, like, yeah, it seems odd at first, but you get used to it. You come to realize that they're just very driven volunteers. Their first few months are always really hard work, but then they settle in and they get nice enough. You probably caught one of them on a bad day. Don't worry about it, guys. I live here. I'm familiar with the situation. The guy seemed genuine enough, but he still seemed a little bit vague. But if I'm being honest with you, when something like that happens and you're not in your hometown, there's something very comforting about a local brushing it off. You're like, okay, this happens. It's all good. But even with that slight comfort, I still had to ask, what is the deal with those unmarked buses? And the bartender playfully rolled his eyes and goes, dude, are we going to talk about this all night or are you going to put in an order? And at the same time, he's just pointing a remote at the TV, turning up the volume of some random NFL game. He said, don't even bother putting in an order. I know what you guys want. Best thing on the menu. Walked into the back and came out holding 2 plates of burgers and fries. And he just goes, for your troubles, they're on the house. And then he just left us to eat and just walked back into the kitchen for a bit. So me and Ebro are just sitting on these bar stools in a completely empty restaurant with this lukewarm pre-made burger sitting in front of us and a TV blaring a game at 100% volume that we couldn't care less about. It's a very odd moment after all we just experienced. Nothing about it felt right. We're just sitting there just kind of like, where's everyone at? why are these burgers ready? And I'm gonna be honest, my girl will tell you, I'm a picky eater. I was not touching this burger. And now all my mind could think about is leaving. Everything about this feels off. So I decided I'm gonna suggest an idea about getting out of here to Ebro, because I don't know how interested he is in these soggy fries, but I'm trying to go. So I say, hey, are you trying to call an Uber and just grab some food at the hotel that's been amazing for the last 3 days? And Ebro looks at me and goes, bro, I already ordered one. We were still planning on calling the police from the Uber to put a wellness check on Claire, but we felt like we genuinely needed to leave this area. Everything about it just had a bad vibe. So we're just staring at Ebro's Uber app, counting down the seconds waiting for this guy to show up. But once the first driver got within a half mile, he canceled the ride. The first one we didn't freak out about because it's common for your Uber driver to change. You know, sometimes it shuffles within the first few. But after the third Uber canceled on us, we started to get worried. It seemed like no drivers wanted to do any pickups in this area, which is never a good sign for the safety of the area. So I tell Ebro, book another, and immediately send them a chat, basically begging them to not cancel. And the driver replied right away, basically saying, no worries, don't worry about it, I'll get you. He doesn't mind picking us up from there, which was a momentary relief until 3 minutes pass and he sends us another chat saying, the roads are blocked off. There must be an event downtown. They're not letting me in. This guy said, they won't let me in. Who is they? The only people in this entire town are Claire, the bartender, the soaking wet 18-year-old wearing all black, and all those weird-ass people hiding in the bus. Oh, and the shivering in their boots security guards. We can't forget them. You could take one half lap around the block and you know that there's not an event going on down here. So Ebro and I share a little look with each other with a much higher sense of urgency because we have no access to transportation. There aren't any buses or trains down here. They don't have good public transit infrastructure. We're basically on our own. We're probably gonna have to walk back, or at least back over the bridge to Clearwater Beach to be on that island, which is at least a 40-minute walk from where we are. So I'm just straight up with him. I'm like, bro, I want to leave right now. Let's get out of here. And Ebro goes, say no more, and stands up to leave. But as he stood up, he started looking out the front of the restaurant, and he basically sent some knuckles into my ribs to get my attention, so I would look at what he was seeing immediately. So I whipped my head towards the front of the restaurant, and there's Claire, small lady, barely has her head over the windowsill, blinking really hard in 2 increments, over and over again, trying to get our attention. It was as if she was trying her best to do Morse code with her eyes. And I don't care what the bartender said, this girl was no volunteer because she came back to find us to get help. So we waved to her to come into the restaurant so we could talk to her off the street, because we just wanted to let her know that we're leaving right now and she could either come with us or stay in this establishment and call the police. She seemed reluctant at first. She seemed very dedicated to just standing there blinking repeatedly and not listening to our gestures to come in, but eventually after we waved hard enough, she actually came in through the door. But as she entered the restaurant, she started walking up to us, but then stopped halfway and then just stood there frozen in fear. And I could tell that she was looking at something behind us, so I whipped my head around and I see the bartender standing behind the bar looking at Claire very intensely. He pretended to greet her kindly to save face in front of us, but I saw the intention in his eyes that he was trying to tell her. He was threatening her with his eyes. I saw it. It was subtle, but I could see what he was doing. He then asked us, without looking away from her, is this the person that you were talking about? And I knew in that moment he was trying to get us to tell on her, but I wasn't going to do that. I was trying to come up with something in my head, but Ebro came up with something even quicker than I could. And Ebro just confidently says, no, this is Claire. She's taking us for a free personality test after this. The one that we were worried about was wearing all black and sweaty. This was a bold thing for Ebro to do because the only people that we had seen in all black were men. So he could have slipped up with this risk that he was taking. We didn't know if there were certain gender roles in whatever this organization was, but apparently there wasn't because it worked. The bartender went, oh, that's why you were worried about them. Those individuals are an RPF. It's a very tough program, but I promise you they're going to come out better the other side. I can assure you, if they're wearing all black, you have nothing to worry about with them. They're just going through a little bit of hardship. And you're in great hands with Claire. And that personality test, it's going to change your life. Ebro's risk paid off because the bartender seemed very excited that we were ready to leave and take that personality test. But we had to let Claire know right when we got outside that we were intending on leaving, while still being slightly discreet about it. So we got out of the building scot-free, but once we were back on the sidewalk, I'm looking around and I'm noticing that there's a lot more people on the street. But I also noticed right away that these weren't normal people. This wasn't just people shopping around on a random day. These weren't people commuting to work. It was more of them. They were all wearing that same uniform, and they weren't walking naturally. They were walking as if walking naturally didn't come natural to them. They were walking around like they were on the Truman Show. Like if we go into a building, they're all going to freeze and wait for us to come back out. Like, you know when you can tell that somebody's walking down your neighborhood without a set destination in mind? They're just lingering around, meandering, if you will. But they were specifically lingering around us. When we would walk past them, they would slow down and kind of stay around us in earshot as long as they possibly could. Well, they were trying to make it look natural, but it was clear as day what their intentions were. It reminded me of when people play musical chairs and there's only one seat left with the seat pointing in one direction, and the two people are playing, and when they go around the back, they speed up and swiftly go around the back. But once they're going in the front of the chair, they almost move in slow motion to extend the time in front of the seat as far as they can. This is what it felt like they were doing on the street. They were walking swiftly and weird wherever they were going, but whenever they would get close to us, it was as if our gravity was pulling them in and it was hard to get out of our orbit. It was so obvious that they were attempting to linger in earshot to listen to what we were saying for as long as they possibly could whenever they had the chance. I wasn't sure if the other two noticed until I looked at Ebro, because Claire was just walking silently with her eyes straight ahead. And when I looked at Ebro, he noticed. He looked pissed. He looked ready to fight pissed. So I whisper under my breath, I'm like, dude, are you seeing this? And he goes, yup. Be ready, they keep getting closer. And then this was the first time in this entire day that Claire said something that made sense. She said that they're getting close for me, not you. They think that you're potential recruits. They're listening in to see if I'm following proper dissemination protocol. If they hear me speaking outside of ethics, they'll write a knowledge report on me. A few questions came to mind in that situation, but the one that came out of my mouth was, why are they worried about what you're saying to us, and who are they reporting to? And she got half an answer out before one of them got too close for her to speak openly. She said, it is our moral responsibility to uphold the integrity of his teachings. If somebody strays off course, it's our responsibilities to report it. But that's all she got out before she had to stop. The way she was speaking still was so rehearsed, it was as if she was still repeating sentences that she had memorized. But it also seemed as if she hadn't made her own interpretations of the sentences that she's just regurgitating. And I say that because, to me, what she just said implies that everybody involved in whatever this is a part of some mass snitching culture. Like everybody is monitoring each other at all times to uphold integrity. But she's just relaying some talking points that justifies this horrible culture. If I'm being honest with you, it kind of reminded me of North Korea and how they're taught to tell on each other out of fear of being caught themselves. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept, but in North Korea, if you hear anybody say something bad about the government, you have to report it right away. And not because it's morally right, but because if another person, a third party, heard it, and they report it and they mention that you heard it too, but you didn't report it, you get punished the same amount as the person that actually said it. So it creates this mass snitching culture out of fear of punishment. And that seemed to be what was going on here. Claire was speaking extremely carefully, just in case anybody around us, anybody lingering too close to us, overheard her. She was clearly not willing to go outside of the rules verbally yet. But we knew by her blinking signals at us that she was internally, mentally checked out of whatever was going on here, but she wasn't going to give any of the people around her any ammunition to use against her. As the person that got too close to us that stopped her last sentence got far enough away for her to continue speaking, I expected her to continue her sentence. But Ebro filled the space by getting right to the point, and he was absolutely right to do so. He said very quietly but sternly, he said, smile and blink 3 times if you're leaving with us right now to get help. Say whatever you need to say while we're here, but you need to let me know if you're coming to the bridge with us." And Claire looked right in Ebro's eyes, and she smiled the smile of a broken individual with a deep pain behind her eyes. And she said, "You're going to benefit so much from the personality test today. It will help you identify all the ruins in your life." This was the final straw, because nothing that she was saying matched the plans that we had. We were leaving, but she's still talking about this damn personality test, just reciting whatever she was taught word for word. But she gave 3 very hard blinks throughout her responses. So even though her words didn't match her intentions, we were all on the same page, and we were all ready to leave this weird city. So we didn't even say a word to each other as we power walked all the way to the bridge that went to Clearwater Beach. And luckily, none of the cronies were saying anything to us on the first stretch of the walk. And I can only assume that they weren't saying anything because they suspected that we were going back to where the personality test took place. So they weren't suspicious of it. They thought Claire was guiding us to where they wanted us to go. But it wasn't until we walked past the place that we were supposed to take the test at where the cronies started to pick it up a little bit and started to act much more bizarre. It was as if the moment we passed the intersection that we were supposed to turn to go to the building that we were supposed to go to, the entire city kind of lit up with this frantic energy. It felt like we hit a beehive and all of the worker bees started exiting the hive to intimidate the attacker. It started by the security guards standing their ground. They didn't run inside as we were walking by. They stood on their post and they looked at us, still nervous and a little bit shaking, odd for a security guard, but they were radioing to somebody that we were going past them. And then the streets started to fill up a little bit more with some more foot traffic, and everybody was coming out of these off-white buildings. And again, even these new people are pretending to be regular citizens, but they clearly have no idea how to be regular. Whenever we got into the proximity of one, their energy was that of a teacher's pet that's trying to linger around the group to get any type of material to bring back to the teacher and get everybody in trouble. And what really freaked me out is when we walked by the corners of the buildings and I looked up at the security cameras and they were turning with us as if somebody was monitoring our movements and watching us from some type of surveillance room. This moment felt like some type of intelligence agency was doing a social experiment on us. It felt like everybody that was around us and exiting these buildings were paid actors, and whoever was running the show was just watching us sipping a cup of coffee from a surveillance room or in one of these buildings where we have no idea their location. And then we were only a couple blocks away from the bridge, couple blocks away from being home free. And that's when the little cronies started saying some things under their breath as they walked past us. They were whispering things like, "They need you in auditing." Then something like, "You know how SPs are treated." And then one I heard was, "Out there's a prison," and just a bunch of other odd nuanced threats where I didn't really know what they were saying, but I could tell they were trying to get to Claire. But another weird detail to it was that they weren't saying it to Claire. They weren't making eye contact with her. They were walking by, not looking at us, but once we were directly in earshot, as they were passing, they would just kind of say it out loud, so we would all hear it clearly, but there was no proof that they said it to us. But once that happened for the 3rd or 4th time and we saw the security guard radioing and we saw the cameras turning with us and clearly this entire town was conspiring against us, we actually started to run. And we probably should have started running sooner, but the accumulation of the impending doom of this situation was just too much, and it lit a fire under our asses and we started booking it. And also, just to paint the picture for you, none of these people were physically imposing by any means. They all looked like Claire. Underslept, undersized, malnourished, not treated well. But the simple fact was that there was a lot of them, and there isn't much that you could do if 60 people are holding you down at once and dragging you into an off-white, beige, weird, tinted windows building. If I'm being honest with you, we were scared for our lives at that point. It was time to get moving. And let me tell you, me and Ebro would have been out of there so fast. We would have been gone. We would have been over that bridge in less than 5 minutes. But just to be candid, Claire was not that fast. She was clearly malnourished. She was not taken care of well. She couldn't run. She could barely run. And I'm not trying to say that in a rude way. It was just the reality of the situation. She was underslept, malnourished, and was not capable of escaping efficiently. We had to kind of slowly jog next to her. She was urgent, and she was trying to get out of there as fast as she could, but it just wasn't enough. And every second that we were still there, still on these city streets, felt like an absolute eternity. But as we started to get closer to the bridge, the frequency of the passerbyers, the odd cronies, slowed down significantly. We felt like we were on the home stretch, and in that moment it seemed like we were going to get out of there. But we turned that final corner where we were going to see the bridge. We were going to see the bridge that was going to get us to a safe area. And my stomach dropped. Right across the street from us, there were construction workers that were blocking off the sidewalk that we were meant to use to leave. And they were putting up some type of makeshift barrier as we were approaching it. It was about 5 or 6 people, and they were all wearing hard hats and neon vests, so I figured that they were probably just some union guys that were getting ready to do some construction on the bridge sometime next week, but they had to block it off today. And I thought we could ask them if we could slip by them or ask for help if we really needed it. So as we're approaching them, I call over to them like, yo, can we slip by before you start your project? And the man that was clearly in charge of this project stood up to greet me. He was bent over at his waist, just fixing his shoelace as we were arriving. And as he finished up and stood up in front of us, I was taken aback by how tall this dude was. This dude was at least 6'10", if not teetering into 7-footer territory. And he was just rocking this bleach blonde comb over with oddly black eyes. They weren't completely black, not like the white parts of his eyes, but it looked like his irises were all pupil. It was almost like he was off some Molly or some party drug or something. But he was polite, and he very gently said, "I'm sorry, gentlemen. We can't let you onto the bridge while we're working." Initially, I'm going to respect what he's saying. He's a construction worker. The bridge might be dangerous. Like, I'm not trying to mess this guy's day up. But as I'm about to change course and start filling him in on the fact that we might need some help here, and this is a very specific situation, I notice his shoes. This dude was wearing dress shoes at a construction site. Then I looked at all of the other workers doing little busy work, and they're all wearing dress shoes as well. And I realized at that moment, these aren't construction workers. These aren't good, hard-working union guys. These are a bunch of cronies. They're all wearing that same uniform that we saw everybody else wearing, and they just threw neon vests over it and a hard hat. They're all in on this. And before I even had the chance to look over to Ebro to see if he noticed what I noticed, goes, "So we're walking over this bridge, and anybody that tries to stop us might end up dead. You hear that, toothpick?" Clearly throwing an insult at the skinny tall dude, just referring to how skinny he was. I wasn't sure if he was going to take it there, but I was pretty happy that he did. I liked our odds against this small group of guys, and even though this dude was like 6'10", 7 foot, he kind of looked like he would get gusted away in the wind. My personal opinion is that we would tear through him like a chainsaw through room temperature butter. And honestly, the toothpick man was not expecting us to be so forwardly aggressive and threatening. So he immediately took a different angle. He was not expecting it. If anything, he looked extremely uncomfortable about the impending violence of this situation. Like, he looked genuinely scared, and he should have been. I'm no walk in the park, but Ebro is a true problem for anybody. Dude's a jiu-jitsu black belt with plumber strength and freaky athleticism. When he says that somebody might end up dead in a situation, it's a very plausible outcome. And like I said, Toothpick Man was very scared and showed his true colors right away. He was a weasel. He turned all of his attention towards little defenseless Claire and said, "Your husband told us everything. He told us everything you've been saying in his audit. If you don't report back to Flag, you'll be deemed a suppressive person. And I promise you, you'll be permanently disconnected. And your husband is ready to disconnect with you based on your decision. Your children have been briefed on your actions and they want no contact with you. But that's unless you enter introspection today. It's your choice, your family or these mogs." Referring to us. Almost none of what he said made sense to us because he used so much terminology that we weren't privy to, so his threat almost fell flat to us. But it set Claire off. She entered a legitimate mental breakdown. She was absolutely freaking out, and I could tell that she didn't know how to express it. Whatever Toothpick's threat really meant sent Claire into an existential crisis, and we didn't have any time to get a better understanding of the situation. So all I could tell her was the part that I kind of understood, which was her kids. So I tell her, like, yo, Claire, we can get your kids. We could go to the police and we could get your kids. And she started shaking her head and just freaking out, saying, you don't get it. You don't get it. So I pleaded with her in that moment to help me understand what we're dealing with here. And she settled down a little bit just to try to get an explanation out. And she said, my husband won't leave with me because his parents and his brothers will disconnect from him if he does. And my children aren't here. My children are at the ranch in California, and they'll never speak to me again if their father and their extended family get to them before I can. They'll believe that I'm suppressive because that's what I taught them. And they'll disconnect with me because they're good girls and they believe that it's the right thing to do. It's what I taught them to do. I'll lose everybody I've ever known. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was psychologically stuck here, and everybody in her network would disconnect from her if she came with us. Ebro tried to chime in and just goes, the police will help you, let's go. He was clearly ready to have this conversation on the other side of this bridge. But then Claire replied, very devastated, you go. I'll be okay. And she came in really close to us to whisper to us so Toothpick and the peanut gallery couldn't hear. And she said, I gave them all my money. I let them take my children, and my husband isn't ready to leave. I have a better chance here. If I leave now, I'll likely never see them or speak to them again, and I'm not ready for that. If I stay here, I can leverage myself closer to them and potentially get through to them so we could all leave in the future. Please don't call the police after you leave. It'll just make it harder for me to get to them. It'll make it all worse. This was a horrible realization because Claire had no choice but to stay with these horribly manipulative people in this incredibly abusive, disgusting situation. And if I'm being honest, what she said kind of made sense. She was gonna lose everybody in her life if she left this way. But if she stayed, she could potentially leverage to a better place and find a more strategic exit point and have more time to convince her husband and her kids to leave with her, or at least get close enough to them to say goodbye to them properly, instead of giving these weird people, this Toothpick 7-footer deranged man, time to get to her kids and convince them to disconnect from their mother. And let me tell you, Toothpick Man, the weasel of the year, had the most disgusting, satisfied, smug look on his face when he realized that he won. His threats worked. We weren't going to force her to leave. We're not going to kidnap Claire. If we forced her to come with us, we'd be forcing her to take a leap that she wasn't ready to take. And it's not like we have the means to support her. She's about to leave this place. She has $0 to her name, no property, no job, no education outside of this, no help anywhere. What are we supposed to do to help other than just drop her off at a police station and be like, good luck? Like, at least here she got shelter and food, and maybe she could redeem herself and get closer to her kids and her husband. If she left with us, she'd be homeless with no family or friends the moment she stepped on that bridge. But the bright side of the situation was that internally, she was ready to leave, so she could strategically leave when the time was right. She was no longer brainwashed by whatever cult this was, and we never found out what cult it was. She just walked back into downtown Clearwater with Toothpick Dude and his minions, and Ebro and I crossed that bridge back into real society, and we respected her wishes to not notify the police because it really didn't seem like they could do anything about it in general. They'd show up, she'd say that she wants to stay, and nothing would come about it anyway. But for whatever it's worth, to anybody visiting downtown Clearwater, Florida, there's some cult controlling the downtown area, and they use tactics of manipulation so powerful that their members are forced to stay once they're in. So whatever you do, don't take a free personality test if it's offered to you. They'll drain you of all your money, and you'll be surrounded by helpless, resourceless, and terrified individuals. And these individuals are so indoctrinated that they will live in horrible conditions and tell you to your face that they are happy, and snitch on you if you don't love being treated poorly. I hope you guys enjoyed that story about the cult of Clearwater. There's something really weird going on down there. You should actually look into it. Clearwater, Florida, the downtown area, is legitimately controlled by a cult, and it's super freaky. So I encourage you to go down that rabbit hole. We're going to post again next week. I hope you guys loved the story. I hope it was intense. I hope it was fun. Next week's is going to be sick, so make sure you like and subscribe. And of course, maybe grab a piece of merchandise. I think there's 20 items left. I'll see you next week. We love you. We're out. And if you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks that you would enjoy this one as well. So click it.